Good morning and welcome to Glencoe. I'm by the King's House Hotel here, and I've come here to do my video which I've been promising for a long time. See what I did there? About panoramics or panoramas or pans, and this is going to be a complete guide to panoramics. Stay tuned. So what are panoramics? Panoramas. By the way, I think the proper name should be panoramics. You'll hear me call them panoramics if I'm in posh company, or pans if not. You'll hear people call them panoramas, but that always reminds me of that TV program way back in the day. So panoramics is what I'm going to use, and the definition of a panoramic is something that is wider than it is high, although you can have vertical pans as well. But basically the aspect ratio is going to be almost, I think, twice as wide as it is high. I think that's kind of the given definition. It can be wider than that. My panoramics tend to be an aspect ratio of a 65-24 because that used to be on the back of the Fuji GFX as one of the aspect ratios. And actually something like a 68-24 ratio fits really nicely on the photo speed panoramic paper. If you're using Lightroom or Photoshop or anything like that, in fact most photo packages you can actually type in your own custom aspect ratio, which can be that paper size, which means everything prints really well onto that paper. So that's the definition of a pan, and the history of panoramics goes back to the start of photography. I must admit, I thought it was a very recent innovation, but actually from the moment that daguerreotypes and cold plate process, all of that was kind of invented, people were photographing panoramics. Now in those days they were taking several plates and sort of kind of stitching them together manually, and they were used mostly for cityscapes, for photographing big vistas of cities. Nowadays they've been used for all sorts of different things. So let me take you back to my history with panoramics, and I'll tell you the things that I remember. So those of you who know me or you've followed my channel, you'll know that I used to be, years ago, a school photographer. I used to go to schools and photograph the children, groups, individual portraits, teachers as well. And also, we would also photograph those big panoramics that people bought. You may see some in some school halls and things of the whole school together using staging. So that started off by using a camera that rotated, so all the chairs and tables were put in kind of a semicircle, and the camera would start one end and sweep round to the other side, and you used to get that picture with boys stood on the end who would jump down, run through the other end, stand on the other end, so sometimes people appeared twice. That's how it used to be done. And then following the improvement of emulsions and prints, we would photograph, and most of the ones I was involved in were photographed on a 5x4 plate camera or a 10x8 if it was a really big group, and we would just print off the middle section, so we'd crop it really. And I remember working in a darkroom printing these off, and we'd come up with this brilliant contraption which basically involved a Henry Hoover and that little attachment you use to get dirt out of your car seats, stuck into the side of this bit of 16 by or 20 by 8 block. It had little holes in it. We'd made a little frame. We stuck the Henry Hoover in the end and turned it on, and it would then, therefore, any paper that you laid on the top would just be sucked down flat, and we'd use an enlarger just to print the middle section, which was quite ingenious. That way though, because we use 20x8 or 24x8 as our panoramic aspect ratio, we could use 8-inch roll of paper and just cut it. So that works really, really well. We got to the stage where we could literally just do one, move it along, next one, move it along, and then stick it all in the machine to process, which was really interesting, and then cut them at the end. So that was how we used to do school photographs. And when I started to do landscape photography, I really liked panoramic, that kind of aspect ratio, and as you know, I've used it a load. And I started to crop things, but because at the start of my career in landscape photography, I was using a Canon 350D, and the aspect and the actual pixel count was only 8 megapixel, and you crop a big section out of an 8 megapixel camera, and you haven't got an awful lot of megapixels left. So what we used to do back in the day is we would turn the camera portrait, and I'd use this. Now this is called a Panosaurus head, and the way this worked was it stood on a tripod. The camera sat here, portrait way. There's some adjustments here, look, that you can adjust it all. And then there was a spirit level, which I've since lost, subsequently lost, but it goes in there. And we would then swing the camera around like that. And with this, we had to have something called a nodal point. In other words, if you close one eye and look at something and then close the other eye, you'll see that the thing moves around. Well, a nodal point basically means you have the camera forward and back until actually that doesn't happen. Doesn't matter which eye you closed, it would still be exactly the same, and that meant the lens was perfectly in place, and it meant stitching things together was easier. So stitching is when you take your pictures and you put them together so that people can't notice. And there are ways to tell, which I'll go through in a bit. So that was a Panosaurus head. I used to love doing that. I photographed this using this. This is 13 different images stitched together at Flatford, and it's been one of my favourite pictures and one of my most popular pictures since I've shot that. Really beautiful day, and you can tell that this is stitched together because if you look at the bend, like slight clouds, you can see that there's kind of a curve. This one as well, a Dedham, exactly the same. And these are pans that have been stitched together. Nowadays, well, my sensor nowadays is a 45 megapixel sensor, and I can actually crop it without having to worry too much and just use a wide angle lens. So next I want to talk about why you'd want to do a panoramic, and then I'll show you how to do one, and then we'll talk about different compositional tips. So why would you want to shoot a panoramic? Well, generally for me this is not a very good example, because if I've got a very boring sky which is just completely blue or just completely grey, and I've also got a big expanse of nothingness on the foreground, if you crop it, you just really take the eye to the interesting bits. So this particular one I shot the other day at Torrenloch, and you can see that the sky was completely blue, nothing particularly interesting in it, and also the loch, there's a nice reflection, but the rest of it was just water. So you can see that's worked really, really well in my opinion. So that's why you would take a panoramic, and actually if you put them on your wall, you can find you can get 2 or 3, so that's quite a nice thing. They're easier to transport. You can print them onto thinner paper, which if you're using rolls of paper is a lot easier. So panoramics then are quite useful. Right, so let's look at how we take a panoramic. So the first thing you need to do if you're doing landscapes, and I normally shoot, as you know, towards sunrise or sunset, so it's normally dark, so I normally do a tripod. You don't have to, you can hand hold these, you're very careful. And technology nowadays is so good that you can just use your phone. But for the panoramics that I do, I need a tripod, and the first thing that you need to do is get the tripod level. So to help you, we've got on the top here a little bubble spirit level. We've also got them on the tripod head, and I'll get both of those things so that the bubble is in the middle. That means the tripod is solid. Then we need to attach the camera. And what we've got in our camera is a spirit level as well. So you can see the green line there, 2 green lines. That camera is perfect level. And what you're looking for is that when you rotate it around this axis, that green spirit level in the camera stays level. Therefore, everything's going to be straight, and when you stitch it in the software, it will find it really easily. So, next thing you need to do, manually focus. If you change the focus point, or the camera changes the focus point, it's going to make the actual size of the image vary, which is going to make it difficult to work together. You have to also have a fixed focal length, so you can't start zooming in and out because it won't work. So fixed focal length, manual focus, and manual exposure. Now, the exposure range on this scene here isn't too bad. If you've got highlights and dark shadows, then I tend to not want to burn out the highlights, so I tend to go to the brightest part of the scene and work out where the highlights are not clipping, and then photograph everything that way with the same exposure, and I can then do some work on that in post-production. So once you're happy with that, you can go left to right or right to left. I tend to go left to right. I've always done that. I don't think it matters, but must admit I've never tried it. So I'm then going to start from left to right. I'm going to take photographs, and with a geared head like this, you can literally, I normally go 1, 2, 3, 4 turns, take another 1, 2, 3, 4 turns. What you're looking to do is overlap about 20% of the picture as you're going along. So basically 80% is the same as it was, just go 20% further to the right. And then it should stitch together. Now you can shoot JPEG or you can shoot RAW. I tend to always shoot RAW because I can do a lot more to that in post-production. Right, let's shoot this now and I'll go through that with you. Okay, so we've got 1/8 of a second at f11 here. First exposure done, and then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 turns on here. Next one, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, let's speed this up. And there we have it. That's been shot now. Now let's talk about composition. Let me turn you around and show you what I'm looking at. So this is, for me, a classic panoramic. If I put my finger there, there's nothing much of interest there. And also, we could lose some of this sky. So that's how it's going to look. And what I always look for are 2 bookends. This is a bit exaggerated, but we've got a bookend here, and we've got a bookend here, and the main part of the image is here. Some photographs, like this one, has got a kind of along the thirds, so you have a tree here or a tree here, and then 1, 2, so you might have 3 elements to it. I often put the subject on one of the thirds, either there or there. That's a kind of compositional tip, but it's quite nice to have 3 things, something on the end, something on the other end, and then your subject somewhere, either on the third or bang in the center, depending on what kind of composition it is. Right, so now I'm going to take you into Lightroom, show you how to process these. So here are the images that I shot in last week's video at the Ullswater Boathouse, you may remember. You can see that I've had the camera, portrait orientation, and I've shot a series of images with a 4-turn click on the horizontal axis on the gear head every time. So that gives us this nice overlap. What you can do if you want to, I'm not necessarily going to need to do this, but you could, let's say you want to adjust the color on this, so you can, if you want, make any adjustments, right click and then go develop setting, copy the settings, Okay, it gives you options of what to copy, and then what you can do is select all of the others, and then you can go right click, develop setting, paste, and that will make sure that applies all of those images that you've selected. However, I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to make any adjustments to this, I'll make this at the end for this particular image. So I've got these 9 plus this one plus this one. So there's 11 images there together, and to convert them to a panoramic, it's a question of pressing right click and then photo merge, panorama, and you'll see that there's also an option for an HDR panorama, because what you can do, and I didn't mention this in the field, but if you have a very bright scene, you can actually bracket each of your images as well, and it will combine those for you into an HDR panoramic. But all I need to do at the moment is press panorama, and the software will now stitch this together. You have a selection of spherical, cylindrical, perspective. And if you look at these, they'll just change slightly differently. I normally have mine on spherical. I'm going to go on perspective for mine with 11 images. I've got auto crop set, and I've got auto settings set. I don't bother with the stack. And now I'm just going to merge those together. So the computer is going to go away and process those. You can see that I've already done a few, and this is what you get at the end. So that's the finished panoramic. Now what I can also do at this point is click on the crop button, and I can go to my 65-24 ratio. You'll see that it's changed the perspective as well. You've got this bowed shape, but I can also just take a little bit out of that side there. I don't like this little bit of detritus in the water here, so I might actually even go further than that, although I could remove that. And the idea with this is you get rid of that boring clear sky and make this interesting. So that's that done, and I can now adjust the exposure of it all, and I can now play with my various settings that I want to adjust. So there we go. I'm also going to send the drone up, because the drone will do panoramics on its own. So let's see what the drone makes of this. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, a little run through of panoramics. Any comments, leave them below if I've missed anything out that you think is important. But I'm going to go and get a coffee, because it's cold out here today actually, even though it's summer, but I am in the Highlands of Scotland, so I guess that's what happens. So from my lovely Glencoe, the beautiful mountains, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care, goodbye.